The research theme that I work under is actually called the Fair Food Hub. It's a research group that I formed when I came to Heriot-Watt University. And it was in response to essentially system inequities and inequalities that exist in seafood supply globally. It's around inequalities in access to resources, in production and in consumption. And as a result, we developed 3 research streams under the Fair Food Hub. And the first is dealing with EDI, so equality, diversity and inclusion. That's around gender inequalities and trying to combat the kind of system inequities that exist around gender diversity and equality in seafood. The second one is around worker well-being and welfare. So that's looking at fisher welfare and fish farmer welfare in seafood supply chains and what well-being means to them and how we can develop that. We have 2 PhD students and their research is funded by a number of companies and of producers in the industry, all involved in funding this research. And that's because all of these industry bodies understand the importance of supporting human rights in seafood supply, but doing more than that. So this is about going more than beyond the legal requirements of human rights. It's about ensuring worker welfare and well-being. And the third one is really the kind of big thinking. So that's looking at the structure of the system that we currently work in. And we're focusing there on alternative economic paradigms or alternative economic systems to produce and supply our food. And the third work stream on system inequalities actually has had significant funding from the OECD, from the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the Cooperative Research Programme, and they helped to fund a conference on Beyond Growth last year. We brought together a number of scientists, researchers, policymakers and industry voices to discuss how to operationalise well-being in the fishing industry. So by working on these specific areas, we actually want to make a difference to the way that people live. And the way that we try to do that is to focus on 2 things. The first is on balance. So making sure that we're not over-consuming, we're not over-producing, we're not exploiting people or the planet's resources. And the second thing is to focus on care. And that is really seeing society as a whole, seeing as our fishing community or our coastal communities as a whole, rather than this idea of just a few people maximising their wealth and maximising their resource use at the expense of others. And we can see already that that doesn't work. We have issues regarding our environment, around biodiversity and disease. We have issues around injustices in seafood supply, around worker abuse on vessels, for example, and on human rights violations. So we're really trying to look at health rather than wealth. So we're really trying to focus on the health of each of us individually, of our communities, of our families, and of wider society, as well as our planet. So the whole aim of the Fair Food Hub is to work with policymakers, with decision makers, and that can be in business as well. So we have a lot of industry funders and a lot of policy and the science community involved in our work. We are working towards SDG 2, so that's an end to hunger, of course, through seafood supply, also to SDG 5 about decent work, SDG 8 through gender equality, and SDG 14, of course, life below water. It's about how we use our marine oceans and seas and conservation and resources. So they are upheld as goals for society to be moving towards. And when we're dealing with a work programme such as ours, which is really it's interdisciplinary, it's really cross-cutting, it works with a large number of partners, then there's the opportunity to work towards a large number of these goals. And of course, they're cross-cutting. One always influences the other. So that's one of our aims and advantages as well. So I suppose the main motivations would be about trying to improve fairness in our food. And by that, I mean justice. So for men and women, for coastal communities, for those who don't have a voice. And a lot of what we do is about raising the voice and advocating for those who are currently voiceless or who are marginalised or vulnerable in some way. Voices of fishers and of farmers are often not represented at high levels in coastal or ocean management or governance, but equally very difficult to hear those voices in seafood supply chains up at the retailer level or consumer level. So it's about trying to make those links more explicit and clearer, and a lot of our work is working with those with sort of the level where production actually happens, and trying to amplify those voices to those who can make a difference to their lives. So decision makers in business and government. And for that, to be honest, you need research. You just need the research, you need the evidence base, and that's what we try to provide, that link between the two. And we do see change. We see louder and louder calls for data around, for example, gender equality and diversity and inclusion in Scottish aquaculture, for example, based on a couple of recent papers that we produced. So there is a growing momentum, and we're really happy to be part of that. And it's really about trying to move society away from the current paradigm, which is all about growth maximization, into valuing well-being and things such as balance and care. And where I think actually we're at the beginning of a wave of societal momentum towards a change. Of course, it's going to take time because there's a lot of people embedded in the current system that gain from this system, but we can see that it's not working. We need to change the way things are done. So we have a couple of big bits in around issues such as worker voice, or looking at the current standard global voluntary certification systems for seafood, about how to adapt those to really hear worker voice and the voices of developing countries and marginalised groups. And I think these bottom-up approaches are the way that we're going to see change and what we're trying to support. And I think it's going to be difficult for those who benefit to let go or to share. And I think that's probably where we're going to have to look at next. What is that going to look like? And if it means a loss of privilege for some of us, what is acceptable and how can we manage that transition? Because we want everyone to gain. We don't want there to be losers in all of this. And so maybe it's talking about growth, for example, instead of talking about growth more widely, sort of monetary growth, maybe we could start to talk about growth such as growth in community, growth in care for each other, growth in health, for example, growth in education. Those are the sorts of growth that are healthy and that we want to be talking about more and more. And so that's really where our work is going to be focused moving forward.